But question for you, Kevin, which
Yeah.
one of these do you feel has the biggest bang for their buck, shall we say? So like the effort that you put into that initiative has the biggest effects long term in development?
I think for me, it's the individual development plans is probably the cornerstone of it all, because that's the one for me that really formulates the goals and the plan. And I think if you don't have that, then everything else becomes a little bit grey. You know, it's not very clear. So I think for me, having that an individual development plan that's co-created between the player and the coach is really the kind of cornerstone of everything else that I obviously went on to talk about. If there was one other element to that I thought was actually really beneficial, I would probably say I actually really like the parental one.
Yeah.
I think that one for me helps create a better culture within your team, because the parents are then involved and engaged in that, and the communication and the constant messaging is the same between the coach, the parent or parents, and the player. And how often as coaches do we sometimes find it frustrating that we're trying to impart certain things to players, and then on the car journey home, sometimes parents might be, through no fault of their own, sometimes telling them a completely different message. And I think that can be very confusing for an individual, particularly a younger player. So I think for me that one's actually a really beneficial one, and that it's all joined up and everything's incomplete. You know, for me, the parent, the coach, and the player are all getting the same messaging consistently.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think it's such a underappreciated resource, just using the parent, getting them on board and helping them to, as you say, create this like union, so that this message is the same, is consistent. So are there any, you obviously mentioned about using getting the parents to take notes during the training sessions. It's quite effective, but have you had any ideas or any experiences with other techniques that you've done to incorporate parents into training or performances?
Yeah, I think for me, like that's probably the easiest one, is like, you know, once the player has got their individual goals that they want to set, that the parent almost creates like a kind of scorecard, if you like, you know, and that relates to that, their own child's goal and target. And it can be simply observations made by tally marks, so that they you know, they can score it and say, you know, you made 20 passes here or whatever it was. Or it might just be that they make some basic observations as well. So again, it might relate to things like communication and stuff like that. So it might be then they take some notes of the quality of the communication that was given, rather than how many times they shouted, for example. It was actually what is the quality of the information that was given, as opposed to how loud they were. So yeah, so there's different ways of doing it, but I think for me it doesn't have to be too complicated, and I think that was a key thing for today. Everything that I'm mentioning there is all quite simple. It doesn't require a lot of resource, a lot of money. All it needs is a bit of planning and a bit of joined up thinking. And I think if you do that and you wrap all that around the player, then I think what you'll get is a player that's going to develop and get better under your care, and hopefully fulfill their potential, obviously moving forward under your kind of stewardship.
Brilliant. Yep. And with the buddy system, would you have players with similar IDP goals for the quarter, for the 12 weeks working together, or would you deliberately mismatch? So maybe even on a personality level, would you have like a quieter, more introverted type of players working with more extroverted? How would you look to structure your buddy system?
Yeah, I think they're all really good points. I think they're all fantastic points. I think it really depends on, again, all the coaches on the call know their players, you know, really well. So I've did both. I've did ones where it sits really nicely on their goals, so that they can really work together on their homework tasks. When they break out and talk, you know, during the training sessions, then they've got the same goals or similar goals, so that connection's already there. But I think for by all that, I think for me personally, one of our biggest responsibilities is to develop people. And I think to develop people, like you said, sometimes mixing people up who might not come from the same background, who might not have the same, you know, I mentioned the Brofenbremer theory, where there might be people from different economic statuses, there might be people from different schools, and as you said, maybe personality traits and a whole host of things there. And what sport does is great, doesn't it? Because it can bring so many different people together. And I think for me as coaches, that's a big thing, and we should really not underestimate the power of that. So for me, it really is a skill of the coach, and the beauty of it is that you might decide to do 6 weeks of one and 6 weeks of another, so it might be that you want to, for 6 weeks, you're just going to focus on those process goals being similar and you pair them up accordingly. And then for the next 6 weeks, you then, as you say, start to mix it up. So I've noticed that this player doesn't really interact with this player, so I'm going to put them together and manufacture that relationship, and hopefully that will then grow, and which also then fosters a better team spirit and team cohesion, but hopefully as a byproduct makes more people more confident within themselves and helps develop leadership and communication within the team.
Yeah, really good. On the idea of video analysis and video feedback, I noted that you use the role models. So I had experience of this working with a girls team, and at the time there wasn't too much footage available of women role models. So yeah, we obviously just used whatever Champions League footage we could. But is that now something that you do? You maybe try and take WSL or whatever. There's Champions League and World Cup footage now available. Do you use like gender specific role models? Is that something beneficial?
Yeah, I think it really is. I think you're absolutely right. I think a few years ago there was very little footage and televised games of women's football, so it became really difficult. And I think it's very unfair when you try to then compare female footballers and male footballers. And I know that's probably for another day to debate that, but it's true, And I think for a young girl, they want to be looking at another female role model and think, I want to be that, I can become that. So certainly what we do currently at Rangers in my role is we'll do analysis type sessions based on our game model, and we'll often use our first team, our women's first team, to obviously illustrate that. And I did the same at Manchester City as well, obviously. But just last week, in fact this week, we did something different, and we looked at Wendy Renard at Lyon and Lucy Bronze at Man City, who are obviously some of the best players in the world, and we looked at what they bring to their positions. So like you said, like that's role modelling at the highest level in the women's game, whereas maybe if we had this conversation 5-6 years ago, then it was so much more difficult to get a hold of footage to actually show these girls what these female athletes can actually achieve in the game.
Yeah, I remember, I think mine was literally 5 or 6 years ago. I was working predominantly with girls teams, and apart from the World Cup footage that was available, there was little to go off. So yeah, we had to kind of make do with some Champions League highlights. But I think now we've got so many options and so many different leagues and styles of play for women and young girls to look at and role model. So it's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Funnily enough, you mentioned about ghost coaching, and we had Liam Hughes on yesterday.
Yeah.
He was mentioning how you introduced that concept. So just give us again just a little run through of like how you might use the ghost coach concept in different ways. So you obviously talked about kind of like drive-by individual feedback, but what other ways could we use that?
Yeah, so there's the obvious one that I gave in the presentation was to really focus on the individual, and that's what I used at Manchester City. How you can also use it, and how I've seen it used, is that the other coach can do a counter theme. So, if I'm leading the session, if it's me and you're doing the session and I'm leading the session and it's relating to, build-up play, then perhaps you focus on the press, and your job is to make my job difficult. So, I then maybe coach it, because how many times do we coach for success? And I think for me, that sometimes can be egotistic for us as coaches because it looks great. But actually, the reality is it might not be as easy as that when it comes to the game. So the job of the ghost coach could be, in that instance, that you then go and set up and you go and press with 2 strikers rather than 1. Or you show them inside the pitch rather than outside the pitch, for example. And what that would then do to me, it would give me a bit of problems to then go and try to solve that live. And that's difficult. And again, that depends on the level of the coach and the relationships and all that sort of stuff. But I find that really worthwhile as well. I just think it probably came from, for me anyway, like in academies where we paid obviously for 2 coaches, and I was just looking at it, and I was just seeing one coach working, another coach really just taking a kind of backward step, not intentionally, but that was just the way it was. And I felt for me there just had to be a better way where we could really get more for our buck, really, you know, in terms of that. And we had a lot of skillful coaches that then weren't really impacting on the coaching session. So that's why we introduced the concept of ghost coaching. And we use it primarily for that individual feedback, because obviously that's what the program was for me. It was all about the individual and developing them. It wasn't necessarily about the teams that we had. It was about the individuals. But certainly maybe at a first team level, we would do counter themes. And so you would test me as much as you possibly can with that theme, so I could then try to problem solve with the players live during the training session.
Yeah. Question just come in from Lee. So he's just asking about what you just answered there. So how does a ghost coach differ from a typical assistant? So would you say it's like at the assistant level, they're trying to help you with problem solving and trying to push the session, whereas a ghost coach is maybe working more individually?
Yeah, I think it depends on what you want to achieve. I think for me, certainly what we do at a first team level currently at Rangers is that if the head coach is delivering a session on, you know, for example, pressing, I'll then purposely tell the players against that to then just go and play long,
Yep.
you know, and just really try to stretch the coach that's delivering that issue. And he might not know what I'm doing. That's part of the fun. But then that's the skill of us as coaches then to then, as I said, problem solve with that. So I think it really depends on the stage and age that you're working with and what you want to try to achieve. But I think that assistant coach, or it doesn't always have to be that as well. It can be the assistant coach leads the session, and it might be that the head coach then wants to then go and be the ghost coach. And I think for me, variety is key. And certainly I would encourage that a mix of both is really helpful, because like we all know, the same voice and the same things all the time probably doesn't really stick that well with players. So changing it up as much as you can, and the delivery style and the content of it becomes really important. And that's then the skill of the head coach and assistant coach to work together to make sure that they have a maximise their impact together, you know, through that session, what they want to achieve.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, guys, we're going to bring this in for landing. So I just want to say thank you for choosing to spend your afternoons or mornings, wherever you are, with us. Thank you for that. And Kevin, thank you so much for your insights. It was short and sharp, and I think we took a lot away from it. So I'll just leave final comments to you. So if you want to leave us with something, like one kind of nugget you'd like to really work and kind of focus on deeply, what would that be?
I wish you told me this before the presentation. No, I think for me, just a massive thank you. I think it's always great to see coaches who want to learn and improve, and the fact that you're willing to listen to me for 35, 40 minutes, however long it's been, that hopefully you get something from it. And my biggest takeaway would be go and try things. You know, if there's things that you've seen today and you're curious about it, go and experiment. I think as coaches, we're too obsessed with everything having to look great, and you know, it has to look excellent on the eye. And for me, that's not football. Football is chaotic. It can be messy. It doesn't always have to run smoothly. And we've just got to be confident in ourselves that basically be comfortable being uncomfortable is probably the key thing. And the only way you're going to do that is really to test yourself and try new things. There's lots of things I didn't put in the slides that haven't worked, that have failed, and that's okay. And that's just my experiences, and that I'll put it down to that. And there's other things in those aspects that I shared with you today that work better than others for me, but it does not mean that that's going to be the same for you. Everyone's journey is different, and everyone's philosophy and outlook is different. So embrace it, be curious, and don't be scared to try, and don't be scared with mess and chaotic moments. Be comfortable with that, because I think sometimes that's the best times where we grow as people and where your players learn as well.
Super, top stuff. Thank you so much, Kevin.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll see you again next time. Take care, everyone.
Yeah, guys. Bye now.
Cheers.